We'll talk about beekeeping visuals and all the things you're going to see this time of year. Drones and workers and brood, oh my, honey stores, pollen, capped honey, brood, and also you can see it. And some things are not listed here. There's a little too detailed to do the inventory. And I want to end with rainbow pattern, which is something I want you to imprint in your memory. So let's go into this one. I have to figure out how to hide this thing. Oh, I can drag it away. Okay, I guess it'll be okay, Doc. All right. First thing you're going to see this time of year is drones. One of the key things to know a drone beyond its size is look at the eyeballs. They have a blunt abdomen shape. They're thick through the body. They're stubby like a cigar, like a blunted cigar. You'll typically find them hanging out on the outside and up in the honey area feeding. One of the interesting things you'll see during the day is probably about 3 or 4 times a day, the drones fly out to a drone congregation area to meet with the queen. They start early in the morning, at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and they'll come and go a few times during the day. Their primary task inside the hive, as most people believe, is they just are in there being fed. Scientists believe they have other functions in the hive, but they never really have been able to figure that out. They just hang out. So you're going to see these in massive quantities today, this time of year. Drones are being made by the hundreds in the colony. That's a queen. She doesn't have a very good paint job because she's got a secondary dot on her wing. She's really easy to spot once you get an acumen for understanding how she moves around. One of the key things to see is how short her wings are in relation to her body. They only cover about 2/3 of her body. And when you see her move around, she moves like a ship on the ocean. She's not as agile as a worker. And eventually in beekeeping, you get a sense to look for that movement and you can pick it out straight away. She could be anywhere in the colony. She could be on the inside of the roof. She could be on the inner cover. She could be standing at the front entrance. Most times, during especially this time of year, she's in the center of the brood nest laying eggs. Queen will lay 1,000 eggs, maybe more, maybe less during this time of year. So you can imagine that's what she's doing nonstop. So typically when you see her, you know, you'll pull frame out and she'll be on there. She'll likely walk around while you have the frame up. She may stop and deposit her abdomen and lay an egg, but for the most part, when she sees sunlight, she moves around. If you smoke the hive really heavy, a lot of times she will go down in and you won't find her. So if you were really bent on seeing your queen, just lightly smoke the top of the frames to push the bees down, and that won't drive her down into the bottom of the colony. This is a new bee. For some of you in the meeting the other day, we watched one emerge. They're very pale, ivory color, downy. They sometimes look wet. They don't have any sense of fuzziness in their hair. And if you look at a colony that has bees emerging, you could just wait and you'll physically see one chew its way through the capping in about a 2-minute stretch, and it'll come out and start walking on the comb. One of the first things they typically do is go out and try to beg for food. And then they'll get to cleaning their cells and they will, you know, harden off, and within a day they look a lot more like a regular bee. If you look at capped brood, they're almost always right there in the capped brood area. This is drone brood comb. Drone brood is typically raised in cells that are made larger for the drones. If you see it in worker brood, meaning the small cells of a worker, and when you look at the comb, you could physically see the difference between regular brood comb and drone brood comb. Bees that are drones laid in worker comb have bullets, like what you see in the upper left-hand picture, and a little bit of what you see on the right. Now they build drone usually in the margins, around the outside, between the boxes. A lot of times when you lift the top box off, you'll find drone cells built in there in the gaps on top of the frames. I hate to say it, but drones are not that useful to the colony, and scraping those off and cleaning them up, feed them to your chickens, throw them out in the woods, do whatever with them. It doesn't harm the colony. So you can just take your hive tool and scrape across the top bar, collect that, and discard it however you want to.
We fed them to our chickens, but then chicken ate the whole wax, the comb.
Yeah.
So I got scared.
Yes.
They ate everything.
Yeah, if you give them a frame, they'll just destroy the frame.
They eat everything.
Yeah. That's an unconventional on the right. That's a really unconventional looking drone brood frame. Usually they're green. And some people put drone brood frames in, and the imprint on the green frame that you could buy from a provider is bigger. It entices the bees to build drones. And then, as we talked about Saturday, if you were at the meeting, the varroa mites like to get in with the drones. So they cull the entire frame, put it in a freezer, scrape it off, do whatever with it. You get rid of all the drones, and you get rid of all the varroa mites that are with them. That's the purpose of that frame that you're looking at. It's a drone brood frame specifically for that. This is worker comb brood, fully capped. It has a paper bag style appearance. It's usually made up of old brown wax, some propolis, other things. And underneath every one of those circles is a bee in waiting. Now, sometimes your colony will have drone brood that's not as brown as what you see in the picture. It's going to be straw colored or even light yellow. But as the comb ages in your colony, it will change to this brownish color that you see. As we've talked about, typically the brood nest is in the center. If, however, the sun shines on one side, they could favor that side because it's warmer. You're going to find drone brood and you're going to find worker brood in abundance this time of year. As we get closer to summer, drone brood goes away, worker brood continues, and then when we get to the dearth, which is the lack of forage that occurs here in New Jersey, and it dries out, they will stop building worker comb in the quantity that you're going to see now. Right now, you might pick 4, 5, 6 frames out that look like this one. In the future, it'll be 2 or 1. It'll scale back. What you want to see is like the little picture on the left. You want to see uniform. You don't want to see spotty bees being raised with holes all the way through. Hole here or there, like the ones you see at the bottom of that little shot, is okay. But if there's holes all over the place, that's not really good for your queen. And typically the queen will lay from the center out. So you'll see the bees emerge from the center with all the holes, and then it'll expand from there. This is pollen. You should see this in abundance right now. The pollen colors change all throughout the year. We were watching bees on Saturday bring in red pollen, like what you see some in the shot here. It is almost always right next to the brood because pollen is used to feed brood being reared. They'll gather in both the spring in abundance and in the fall nectar flow when they're building winter bees. Should always be fresh pollen somewhere in the colony, hopefully. You're also going to see it around the periphery, and I'll talk about that in a second. The bees will stack the pollen in to the cell. They pack it with their head, and then they sometimes coat it with honey or some substance that kind of seals it in there. So it'll have a glossy, shiny appearance. These are queen cells. On the right-hand side is a queen cells in abundance. They look like a peanut shell. They're about the same size. They have that dimpled appearance. You'll find these all throughout the cells, meaning they could be on the face, they could be in the margins. For those of you that were with us on Saturday, you know that the bees cut holes in the comb so that they could walk straight through instead of having to go up the face, over the bar, down the face. A lot of times you'll find them in the holes. There's a couple different types, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but a swarm cell is in preparation for swarming. These are the best quality cells to build new queens. A supersedure cell, which I talked about earlier, is something's wrong with the queen. The bees detect it, and they decide they're going to harvest it and grow a new queen. An emergency queen is if the queen got cold, killed, you crushed her for some reason, and they needed a new one, they would nominate some cells and create new queens. Typically, you're going to find these on the lower edges. So if you take a box at the top and crack it, one of the things you'll see seasoned beekeepers do is pull the front edge of the box back a little bit, and using the front edge resting on the top bars, tilt it up and look at the underside of the cells. Especially next year when your colony is full blown and you're going to get to swarming, you'll find them lined up along the bottom of the cells. Burr comb and/or bridge comb. The bees are very efficient. They'll deposit wax all over the place. Sometimes it's at the top of the bar. Sometimes it's between them. They'll build it underneath your feeders. This is okay. It's just where you're going to find it. Almost every place that you violate bee space, the bees will build comb. But even if you have all your frames tucked together, they sometimes build it right across the top edge so they could just walk across and don't have to step or hop or do whatever. I personally, especially on the top of the frame, like to scrape it off. If there's comb on the top of the frame and you set a box over top of it, and the bottom bar of the frame above it is close to the comb, sometimes they'll connect them. You just take a minute, smoke the top of your colony really quickly, and take your hive tool like showing in the picture and just zip off that comb. And I always carry a bag where I can put it off into the side. Don't throw it down on the ground. An important thing about bridge comb and burr comb is when you put all your frames together after you've done an inspection, make sure you put your frames shoulder to shoulder tight and center them between the two outside edges of the boxes. Otherwise, when they have air and space, they'll build burr or bridge comb or unwanted comb. I talked earlier about emerging brood starting from the center out. The queen lays in the center and she usually works her way to the outside. This is about half emerged. And usually when you see this, you can look in the periphery on the edge of the circle and see new bees emerging as it grows outward. The other thing that occurs is as soon as the center is open enough, queen comes in there and starts laying. And she'll lay almost as soon as the cells are freed up if she's in the run of really laying a lot of brood. So this is typical. You'll see the center open and it'll just continue to emerge all the way to the outside of the nest, the capped brood. Capped honey looks like this. They store the nectar they dry it to a certain percentage, and then they just coat it in wax. Normally it starts wet or dry, meaning it's white wax, and sometimes it looks milky white like this, and other times it's translucent. It almost looks transparent. You can see the honey through it. That's not a problem. It's just the way they do it. Different bees do it different ways. White wax often turns to dark wax when the bees walk all over it. New fresh wax has white capping. Older wax turns brown and mottled looking. Whatever they do to the wax capping is irrelevant to the quality of the honey underneath. They typically build wax across the top edge of the brood nest, on the outside frames, and especially in the top. And we often call the honey that they store above the brood nest that gets capped for winter a honey dome. So if you hear that term, that's what that means. This is a guard bee. They display the posture. You can see the tail is down, abdomen, the legs are up, and they will check every single bee. A bee will land with its load, and a guard bee will walk over and antenna it. And if they have a problem, they will immediately jump on it, wrestle it, do whatever with it. If it's one of the colony bees and they smell it, it just passed right through. These bees in this time period are all across the front entrance, which is why before you start, you get a little smoke at the entrance. That way, if this bee gets alarmed, all its nestmates are not going to come out. If you try to work a bee without smoke and they set the alarm, the entire colony, to some extent, will be alarmed and come to a fence and be defensive. If you stand and watch your entrances at any given point and you're watching the bees come and go, especially in the evening when all the foragers are back, you'll see the guards do this, what you see in the picture. This is bearding. As humid and hot as it's been the last couple of days, you may actually have already seen this. It comes in different forms. Sometimes they cover the face of the colony, like up in the left. Other times they hang in clumps under the bottom board, or they'll hang off other hive stands or whatever. The primary premise of this is the colony is so busy and packed. There's so many bees that they generate heat. And they're trying to regulate the temperature inside so the bees come outside so they're not giving off air and heat. That's the belief of this. And if they cluster on the outside, they're not generating heat on the inside, and they can do what's required inside. It's not a problem. This is normal, especially in the summertime, and you'll see this all over the place. These are queen cups. These are not queen cells, they're queen cups. They are in abundance this time of year. Every colony, whether they want to make a queen or not, often generates queen cups. And you can see by the picture that they're off the bottom of the cell. This is what I was talking about when you lift the box. I know it says sting reaction, by the way. They tend to build them off the bottom bars like this. And when you lift the box up, you'll see queen cells off of there because that's where they place this queen cup. They mean nothing unless they're charged. And what I mean by charged is you should always, every once in a while, look in a frame, get the light to the bottom of the cell, and look to see if there's anything in there. If it's wet and you find a larva, it means they're trying to build a queen. Every once in a while, you should just peek in them and see what's going on and make sure they're not trying to build a queen. This is brood in all stages. Number one, you see the egg. It looks like a mini grain of rice. It starts standing up and then it lays down. When it lays down, it starts to grow into a worm. The worm turns into a C-shaped larva. And you can see up in the top, it gets very plump and full. And then eventually, once it gets to the point where it's full blown, it will stand up on end on its tail, and then it gets capped and it transforms into a pupa. So when we talk about brood in all stages, egg, larva, I'm sorry, egg, C-shaped larva to larva, and then eventually to cap, that's what we're talking about. Now you can see the queen in this shot, if you can see this. She's laid eggs here, there, there, but you could see this, the earliest part was this area right here. And then she spread out from there. So she might have laid this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. Then she got this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. Then she started laying these out here. And the eggs are all the way around the outside. So you see a progression. Now she doesn't lay 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in a row. She bounces from cell to cell, sometimes because the one she wants to go to is prepared and maybe it's not. This is another example. And this one you could clearly see that she started in the middle and she's working her way outside. Now imagine that these get capped and the ones from the middle are going to emerge first, of course, because they're the oldest. This is the progression of things. And what I wanted to show you from this brood in all stages is this is an egg. Eggs don't have larvae, or I'm sorry, eggs are not fed. It takes 3 days for an egg to transform into a larva. Once it transforms into a larva, you can tell because the bees start to feed it and it has royal jelly. This is an egg, that's a larva. How do I know? It's got royal jelly. And if you look, this is the progression. It went from egg to C-shape to grub to full-blown worm. And this one's going to get capped any moment now. If you look in your colony, you hold your frame out in front of you, you put the sun behind you, and you make it so your face shadow is down in front of you on the ground, and you hold the frame and you make it so it's down about waist height, you will get the sun shine right down into the bottom of the cell and you'll be able to see these very easily. So in this picture, you can see egg, C-shaped larva, larva, growing pupa, full-blown pupa, bee emerges. This is what you're not going to see, and I wanted to make sure you put this in here. This thing is a varroa mite. Like a tick on a dog, mites grow on the bees. Universally, they hitchhike on the top, but they almost always are on the underside of the bee. If you see varroa mites on the backs of the bees, you have a massive infestation. So just know that. First time I'm going to say it to you, and we're going to say it to you and over again, you're not going to see varroa mites on the bees like this. They're underneath and you can't see them. I say trust the rainbow. I pulled this frame and I shook it off just to show you what I mean by the rainbow. You could see the way the queen is laid all the way through. There's a ring of pollen around the outside and there's honey up in the corners. Can you see the rainbow? It's pretty easy, right? Now, sometimes that honey is capped and sometimes it's not. This is another example, and there's it's capped. This one's a little later in the year, I think. And here you can see capped honey, and it's been walked on considerably. Capped brood, pollen ring, honey stores. Hopefully your frames will look like this. Now, sometimes they'll build brood frames look just like this, and other times maybe you'll find half worker comb and a big batch of drone brood off to the side. It's okay. It doesn't have to look exactly like this, but when you see this, you know you're in a good way. Last thing on this one is you're going to get stung. And I wanted to spend a moment and say, if you get stung, it should be local and topical. Now, don't get me wrong. If you get stung on the finger, you could swell up all the way to your elbow. That's pretty normal for a new beekeeper. But if I get stung on the hand and my throat is closing up and scratchy, that's different. That's not a local reaction. That's a systemic reaction, and that's an emergency. And you should consider Benadryl and make sure you monitor yourself, and at worst, go to the hospital. So I needed to say that out loud. And if you think about the way a sting works, the bee is injecting a venom that your body doesn't know what to do with. There's an acid in there and there's a protein. The reaction to the sting is it wants to cook it, so it's going to get hot. That's how it kills the proteins. It's going to flush the area with water and blood in order to dilute the poison. That's why it swells. It's going to bring immune response to the area and flush it out. And that often is associated with an itchiness. And of course, the red rash and whatever comes with the territory of reaction of your immune system. So actually, if you have swelling, if you have redness, if you have itchiness, that's good. It means your immune system's doing what it's supposed to do. But locally, now take some aspirin. You cannot, personal opinion here, you can't put something on a sting. The sting is penetrating your skin down through to the submaterials. And whatever you put on the topical is not going to penetrate down and neutralize the acid. Now, I'm not saying don't ice it and don't put some cream on it, but don't think that's going to take it away. There's no magic elixir. Pay attention to yourself every time you get stung, and just look for those things where you have difficulty breathing, swallowing, anything like that. Break out in hives. If you do, you need to monitor your situation and go get help if that's the case. Now, we recommend to new beekeepers and deceased beekeepers that you go talk to your doctor, you tell them that you're a beekeeper, and you buy an EpiPen. You never know. I could possibly have a reaction, even though I've been keeping bees for more than a decade. Just like that, you never know. So I have an EpiPen in my kit.